There are many ways to use and misuse commas, and so there are many ways to use commas and sometimes misuse commas. So I want to go over a number of those for you to think about. Commas are one of those things that people often misuse, so I thought it would be important to talk about commas. I want to start with FANBOYS. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So you can use the word fanboy to help you remember those little words. Those are the words we use to separate independent clauses. Independent clauses are two clauses that could stand alone, but that normally we put together to combine a sentence. So the concert was over, but the fans refused to leave, or yesterday the movie premiere, so we made sure to get to the theater early. When you have for, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so, you want to put a comma prior to it if you have two clauses. So the concert was over, comma, but the fans refused to leave. Yesterday was the movie premiere, comma, so we made sure to get to the theater early. Looking for those words and seeing if you need a comma can be really helpful. We also put commas after introductory clauses. So we look for starter words. If you're using words like after, although, as, because, if, since, went, while, there's other words too, but words like that, we need a comma after that sort of clause, that phrase. So while I was sleeping, comma, the dog jumped on the bed. So making sure that while I was sleeping, we have that phrase, that clause, we put a comma. Because it was cold, comma, he ran to grab a jacket. So looking for these words, if you've started a sentence with one of those words, you want to put a comma. Now, since it was Friday, comma, we're getting ready to go out. You don't need a comma, though, if you have the main clause first. So if I wrote the dog jumped on the bed while I was sleeping, I don't need the comma. Only if I do while I was sleeping. The dog jumped on the bed. So he ran to grab a jacket because it was cold. Doesn't need a comma. We're getting ready to go out since it's Friday. Doesn't need a comma. So if you, depending on where you use that introductory starter phrase, you need a comma. Any kind of phrase or long prepositional phrase with our four words needs to be followed like a comma. So this is similar to the clauses. Having finished her lunch, comma, she left the cafeteria to get a good spot, comma, you better arrive early. After class, but before work, comma, I took a nap. So if you say it out loud sometimes and you're going to pause between there, that helps you see if you have an introductory clause or an introductory phrase where you need a comma. We even do this with introductory words. So if we use well, if you use yes, if you use however, you want a comma after it. So well, maybe she didn't mean it. Yes, I'm planning to go to the show. However, you might not like the book. Put a comma before those introductory words. In the middle of a sentence, we use commas often. We use them to set off clauses, phrases, words that we might not need in the sentence. So we use one before that phrase or clause or word to signal that it's starting, and one at the end to signal that it's going to end. So here are some questions to ask yourself. If you left that out, if you left that little section between the commas out, does the sentence still make sense? Okay. Does it interrupt the flow of words in the original sentence? Like, did you add it and it interrupts the flow of words in the original sentence? If you move the elements to a different position, does the sentence still make sense? So if you can pull that out, if it just adds something, but you don't really need it, if you can move things around and the sentence still makes sense, all those things will let you know that maybe you need commas. So that Saturday, which happens to be Halloween, is the only day the park is open. So I could remove this whole section here, right? That Saturday is the only day the park is open, and it still makes sense. The Arrow is my favorite superhero television show. The premiere of Superman and Lois, on the other hand, wasn't too bad. So again, I don't need this. It's alerting. It's not telling me anything new. So I need the comma at the beginning, comma at the end to alert that. And I like classic horror films. My favorite, however, is Nightmare on Elm Street. So you can see sort of clauses, phrases, like a prepositional phrase, and even a word. If I don't need the word however, but I'm using it, I need those commas before and after. If you use that in a sentence, you don't use a comma. Okay, so do not use a comma. That if you're using that, it means it's an essential phrase. So the movie that we watched last night was excellent. If we take out that we watched last night, it changes the meaning, right? The movie was excellent, but what movie? What are we talking about? So we need this clause in there. The phone that fell down the stairs is broken. Again, we need this there. We need to know which phone is broken. He is dreaming that he can play basketball like LeBron. Again, that needs to be there. He is dreaming makes no sense unless you have what he's dreaming about, right? You can have examples without that. The boy in the blue hoodie is my neighbor. So if I just said the boy is my neighbor, that would be totally different. I'm telling him this descriptive sort of clause in there, phrase in there is needed. The player with the least amount of money is the loser. So with the least amount of, right, the player with the least amount of money tells us about that player and who loses. So we need those in there. So make sure if it's something that's important to the sentence, if it's one of those things that makes the sentence complete, you leave the clause. We use commas in a series, right? Separate 3 or more words, clauses, or phrases. So make sure you're using these commas. My favorite Avenger characters are Loki, Doctor Strange, and Drax the Destroyer. So we have commas, right, to separate them out. We do it with phrases too. The family went to the beach, comma, hiked through the woods, comma, and camped in the forest on their vacation. So we don't put a semicolon between these. We don't put a colon and then do the list. We just put commas, even when it is a series. We use them to separate adjectives. Adjectives that are equal, which they describe the same noun in a sentence. So if we could take out one adjective and it still have similar description, those are equal. Those are coordinate. So like can we write it in the reverse order? Would it still make sense? Can we write it with and between them? Would that still make sense? So the smart, comma, witty child answered all the questions. So here, right, we could write the witty and smart child. We could put the smart and witty child. We could say the smart child, the witty child. All of that works together, so that needs a comma. On the other hand, the blue leather jacket is in the closet. Does not work. I can't say the leather blue jacket. That sounds really weird. But the blue and leather jacket, that sounds like it's 2 jackets. If I just said the blue jacket, that might be different than the leather jacket. So that's non-coordinate. So we don't put a comma between those. Here's another example. They bought the brick row house down the block. So they bought the brick house down the block. They bought the brick and row house down the block. They bought the row house down the block. They bought the row brick house down the block. You can't reverse the order. You need that there. Again, no comma. Here's another example with comma. Green Arrow is an arrogant, brooding superhero. So he's an arrogant and brooding superhero. We can put and there. We can put he's a brooding, arrogant superhero. So we need a comma. We could take out one of these if we didn't want it to. We could just say he's a brooding superhero or he's an arrogant superhero and take out brooding. So coordinate, if they are 2 that are sort of equal, they go together, we have the comma. If we need them both as a description, if you can not put and, if you put and in between them and they don't make the same sense, do not put a comma. You do not always need a comma when you have multiple adjectives. Geography, dates, titles, addresses, we use commas in different ways. So we use them to set off different names, dates, titles. For example, this in Chicago, Illinois, so comma between the city and the state is around 240 miles from Macomb, Illinois. So making sure there are commas after the city before the state. Construction of the White House started on October 13th, 1792. is located at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. Between the date and the year, we put a comma. After the first line of the address, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, there's a comma, and then Washington, D.C., right? So the city separated from the district. He tore his knee. When he tore his knee, he went to see Jenny Smith, MD. So if we're talking about a doctor, whatever title you have here, you're going to put a comma before the title. And then quotations. So we use commas before the start of a quotation. Wayne Gretzky said, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." So I'm going to put a comma there, and then I'm going to put the quotations and usually capitalize the first word. If you use some reference to who is saying it in between, it was simple, comma, quotation marks. He said, comma, quotation marks to get the work done, period, quotation marks. And my mom always tells me, comma, eat your vegetables. So any of these are going to make sure that you have commas so that you're alerting us as to who's saying the quote and when the quote is starting, right? If you do it in the middle, comma before, comma after, and entering into it. So those are just some ways to use and to make sure you're correctly using commas throughout your work.